Because we were told, in essence, well, this. Cut number 6. Roll it.
On the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, Americans and American symbols in 2 Arab countries tonight are under attack by radical Islamist forces, and someone at the American consulate in Benghazi is dead. Unclear if that
We're not aware of any actionable intelligence indicating that an attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi was planned or imminent. This is not a case of protests directed at the United States.
It began spontaneously.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies.
Sparked by this hateful video.
Over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
Protests that arose because of the outrage over the video.
This video is disgusting.
Disgusting and reprehensible.
Where there is an offensive video or cartoon.
There was a hateful video.
This is in response to a video that is offensive.
You don't really believe that.
Chris, absolutely I believe that, because in fact it's the case.
That is the now promoted. She was ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Susan Rice. Now she's been promoted to National Security Advisor, one that didn't have to clear Congress, by the way, the Senate. That said, Jim, what did we learn? And what will we learn tomorrow?
Well, we learned what we already know, but the thing that came out today was that the station chief, which is the CIA person who was in charge of Libya, said that there were no demonstrations. That this was not a spontaneous attack, particularly over a YouTube video, but was a pre-planned terror attack. We know that, but what we're learning now is that the CIA, not that they knew it, which we knew, but that they consciously ignored it, or someone told them to ignore it, which is really the case, that the White House, that this isn't what we learned, but this is what we may learn, that it was the White House who instructed them to ignore it. It was the White House who instructed them or gave them this concocted story of the YouTube video.
Jim, we've done a number of interviews on this, and we're trying to find who really turned the story, who gave direction to do so, and if so, did it reach when we speak to the White House, did it reach President Obama specifically? Did he knowingly mislead the American people? Did he have the evidence that this was a terrorist attack and went out 60 Minutes style, as well as in the Rose Garden, because he mentioned it 5 paragraphs later, and then even in a presidential debate, October 16th, if I'm not mistaken, 2012, and lied to the American people? What evidence do we have? Do we know that?
Oh, yeah, we know it. We know it for a fact. That we knew that this was a terrorist attack. We knew that there was no demonstration. We knew that the YouTube video had nothing to do with anything. And whether the president was dialed in on this, or was he being lied to? Because remember, Crane, that's going to be their defense, that somehow he was given the wrong information. And when he repeated it, he believed it was true, right? George Costanza's defense, it's not a lie if you believe it. I think that's what eventually.
That's exactly what I thought of.
Yes.
It's not a lie. Jerry, remember.
Yeah, the evidence will be so overwhelming that the only possible defense they'll have left, which I don't believe, by the way, but the only defense that they will have is that he was given wrong information and that, he didn't know the truth. I personally think he knew all about it, and that he knew when he stepped out there in that debate and in his Rose Garden speech that he was lying to the American people.
You've served as a special assistant in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So what you're saying with your background, and you've also taught people in the State Department. You've taught people in the Defense Department. But my sense is, as you say, it's highly unlikely that the president would not be told that it's a terrorist attack. He's commander-in-chief. He is, to not tell the president this information, tell me, is that, it's not impossible, but is it pretty close?
Yeah, it's impossible that no one told him anything, or no one told him the truth. That's
okay.
not possible. It doesn't work that way. He would have known immediately. And the thing we have to remember about this story about the spontaneous demonstration that riot got out of control based on a YouTube video, the important thing about that is it's not really open to misinterpretation. That was a completely fabricated story that the White House and everybody down the line in lockstep adopted instantly. Somebody invented that story. Somebody in the White House or somewhere in their national security apparatus came up with that far-fetched tale, and they invented it specifically for the purpose, Crane, of diverting attention from the fact that this was a terrorist attack because there was an election going on and the president did not want to have his bona fides as a counterterrorism guy being questioned. So it's not like, oh, someone made a mistake. No, this was a specifically invented story for a specific purpose, which was to protect Mr. Obama.
That seems to be a political move, obviously. Thank you, Captain Obvious, for joining us. Yeah, you've been... All right. But if that's the case, I don't see Leon Panetta, Secretary of Defense, or people in those departments doing that. I would see that more coming from the closest person to the president, which has been reported, which is Valerie Jarrett. Is it possible that she made that decision?
I suppose. Well, I don't know if she'd make the decision. She might have come up with this fairy tale about the video, but I think it was probably a group discussion. Like they're sitting around the Situation Room or the Oval Office or wherever they happen to be, and people were just kicking it around. But the number one thing that they started with was, we have to cover up the fact that this was a terrorist attack because there's an election about to happen, and we can't have the president look like a chump. He was taken by surprise. Our intelligence guys didn't know this was going to happen. It was a major attack. Our guys were killed. They did not send in any help for our guys who were under siege there in the consulate in Tripoli. And so that itself is part of the scandal. But after it all shook down and there was this catastrophe laying at their feet, they had to come up with a cover-up story to make sure that it didn't touch Obama before the election. And to me, the cover-up is much worse than the crime. As terrible, as horrible as the crime is, they can still try to skate out of that by saying they didn't understand what was going on or they didn't know our guys were in danger or whatever. I mean, they can still try to weasel out of that one. But what they can't weasel out of is consciously inventing a completely fabricated story and then lying to the American people repeatedly.
Would there be records of this conversation?
Well, if there's any record, it's destroyed. They're not going to keep something like that laying around. The only way to get to the truth would be if somebody who was present or had knowledge of it would be willing under oath to talk about it before Congress or in some other venue. And I'm thinking that the people closest to Mr. Obama are not going to want to talk about that. But then all we're left with is the lingering question, which is who invented this story to try to protect him from the political fallout that inevitably would happen in an election year.
Could you make the argument that the reason he was blaming it on the video was for national security concerns and it was for the betterment of the country, not politically driven?
No, it was for the betterment of Barack Obama's chances to get reelected. That's all it had to do with. There's absolutely no rationale that somehow hiding the truth from the world was going to improve our national security. Who are you hiding it from? The terrorists? They knew that they did it. They're out there celebrating. They're firing their AK-47s in the air. Who exactly was the truth being hidden from? It was being hidden from the American people. And what was the truth being hidden? That there was a massive intelligence failure that led to a devastating terror attack, that our guys were caught with their pants down, they were paralyzed, they couldn't make a decision to help our guys, and then they had to afterwards cover their tracks and lie to the American people about what happened.
Jim, would the president be involved in all parts of the decision when it comes to not only the response to this in real time? In real time, I know we've covered this before, but I'm still a bit confused because I'm thinking to myself, the president would be made aware of everything that was happening during that time and be formulating some type of response with the best advice from his advisors, including generals, etc. Is that a fair assumption to make? And if so, do we have evidence that that took place?
Yeah, it's a totally fair assumption, and I think it's come out now that there was a meeting, just by chance, there was a meeting going on of the regional combatant commanders in Washington at the time when the attack started to go down, and the president's national security advisor went to that meeting and called the Secretary of Defense out of the meeting. And I don't know if they also called out the AFRICOM combatant commander, but I know they called out the Secretary of Defense. And so they went over to the White House and were talking about something. I don't think they were talking about what to have for dinner.
Okay. And in that conversation, does that get all wrapped up during that time, or is the president, I mean, where was the president that night after that meeting? That's really what I'm asking. Do we know that?
Well, no, we don't exactly know what his movements are. The White House isn't going to admit where the president is or what he was doing. But clearly he had to be dialed into this major crisis that was going down. If he wasn't, that's something of a crisis in itself.
And I guess the reason I asked that is, once again, to go back to the formulation of the story and the people involved and the members involved in that formulation, because that's why I asked about Valerie Jarrett. Who was in his company? Where was he? And is that something that they would be able to say, for national security reasons, we can't tell you who was all there? Or is that something that would be, if there were a Republican, conservative president, whatever, that we would all say, okay, wait a second, tell us who was there?
Well, I don't think there's much of a rationale for saying that it would be classified who was in on a meeting unless there was somebody, whose identity could not be known, some covert operative or something. We're talking about top-level national security decision makers. It's not like there's some secret person out there that we can't know about. So it would be valid to want to know who was in on that meeting. I think it would be valid to actually know. And hopefully we will know. But there are gaps in the story about where the president was, who made what decision, and so forth. And we still don't have the person and persons who concocted this story, this out of whole cloth, this lie about the YouTube video that really, to me, I hate to keep harping on it, but that the conscious cover-up and attempt to deflect attention away from reality. I mean, they just lied to the American people about the nature of this attack. And so whereas, the first two parts of the scandal, the intelligence failure and the failure to respond, you can come up with rationales for that. I mean, you can come up with some kind of story about why you completely dropped the ball on that. But what you cannot come up with a story is, why did you invent a lie to tell to the American people to try to protect Obama with an election coming up? There's only one reason to do that, and it was because they wanted to win. They wanted to win the election without suffering the consequences of their total failure. But to me, that conscious lying to the American people is the worst part of this.